Hello and welcome to Pollock and Thurston here on July the 13th. I am John Pollock, and joining us from Wrestlenomics HQ, it is Brandon Thurston, who is here live from Buffalo. Hello, Brandon.
Yes. Hi, how are you?
The home of Raw this past week, which you
That's
did not
right.
attend. Yes.
I did not. I was not among the 9,000 or so tickets distributed.
Yes. The unofficial rule is once you hit 9,000, you get something to pander to the city. And that is what Seth Rollins had to do, coming out with buffalo wings
I did see that.
to open up Raw. I mean, how endearing to your city, or would this have been a collective groan for most Buffalo natives?
I don't know. I had it on mute. I imagine it got over, though. Chris Gullo was there in person, so
He did go.
All about that on Sunday, I expect.
Okay, well, we will look forward to a live report from Chris Gullo talking about Raw. And you can find Wrestlenomics every Sunday, patreon.com/Wrestlenomics. So much like the Bloodline spiking quarter hours, Wrestlenomics spiking those Patreon numbers, surpassing 500. Let's get them continuing to soar. Brandon Thurston continuing to be a draw in the wrestling media space. So every Sunday, check them out, 11 a.m.
That's still there. The business is on fire, and so is Wrestlenomics business.
Yes.
Sure.
I also several sources have indicated to me a real big guest coming to the Gentleman's Wrestling podcast in the coming weeks. But I can't reveal who yet, but maybe Jesse Collins. He will break that news. But we have a great guest joining us today. You can see all of her work up on YouTube. She has her own Substack that we'll talk about. And from Digital Spy, we're talking about the great Stephanie Chase, who is joining us on a Wednesday evening, UK time. Stephanie, thanks so much for making some time to join us, and welcome to the program.
Hey guys, thanks so much. Yeah, it's 8 p.m. here in Liverpool, which is a really perfect time for me. So thank you.
We have, there was a lot of stuff I wanted to chat with you about. You wrote what I thought was just a tremendous article last week that seemed to get a ton of attention. First of all, can you just talk a little bit about what went into writing this? And was this something that had sort of been building for you, talking about women in the wrestling media space, that I think was probably eye-opening to a lot of people that either are not in the media space or just have not experienced the same things you have?
Well, yeah, firstly, thank you, for your comments about my article. That really means a lot. I wrote it. It was based on a particular incident that happened, that I mentioned in the article. And that drove me to write it at that time. But as far as, my actual reasons for writing it were a lot of things that had been building up. I've been in not just the wrestling media space, but the wrestling space for a long time, as first as a fan, and then as someone that tried for a little bit to wrestle, and then as someone in the media. And I did and have experienced a lot of things that I felt my male counterparts haven't. And that just really aren't talked about, the differences of being a woman in the business compared to being a man. So when the particular incident that I mentioned in the article happened to me, I started thinking about everything that I'd experienced. And at the same time, I'd been thinking a lot about kind of, why am I here? Why am I in this business? Was something that had been playing on my mind for the past year or so. What am I here to do? And I kept coming back to, maybe I'm here to talk about things from a unique perspective, the perspective of a woman and stuff that I've been through. And I thought that I should start actually, rather than just doing a few tweets about a few things, actually write something that may resonate with a lot of people, and help them or encourage them that they could relate to, and maybe people that it didn't resonate with, but men could read it and maybe get a little bit more of an understanding or get a conversation going. So that's really why I wrote it, to put this kind of stuff out there and put it in the conversation more, because it is it's very different, I think, being a woman in the wrestling media space and to being a man. I think we encounter a lot of different things.
So I was looking up the viewership data just to make sure. It is still about 1/3, at least US TV viewership data, about one third of the audience are women. Obviously, I mean, it's been apparent since I've been doing this regularly since about 2015 or so. It's definitely not 1/3 women in wrestling media.
Yeah.
I have some guesses why that might be, but I was wondering if you have some theories.
I think firstly, like wrestling media is super hard to get into. You know, I'm really lucky to find Digital Spy, a place that was covering wrestling, get a job with them. You know, I started as an entertainment news reporter with them. I saw that they covered wrestling and was like, hey, I've been writing about wrestling on my own and I would love to do that for you. And they ended up saying like, yeah, sure, it'd be great having someone that could actually just cover that. So it's super hard to get into. So anything that's really hard for everyone to get in, I think extra hard for women too. And but I think as well, it's kind of hard to go about things the same way that men do. Maybe I think that a lot of men that I talk to, they maybe get their interviews or get their scoops by directly approaching, a lot of wrestlers, can DM a wrestler, stuff like that. I think it's kind of probably a bit different if I start DMing a lot of wrestlers than if a male writer does. I think it can come across different. It can lead to different things. So I think maybe that's a bit of a barrier, that it's kind of maybe harder for women to know just how do I actually get into this? How do I get a start? Like, how do I make connections? I think making connections is super hard. It's something that I find I think when I started, I was like very naive. And then I realized later, like how much you kind of have to have your guard up with people and be sure of people's intentions. So I can understand that things like that might be a little bit of a barrier to women getting in. But I think in general, just wrestling is, on the media side, just super hard to get a job into. So there are going to be fewer women doing it.
You also posted some of the like negative responses you got to this article. And when you are putting your work out there, are comments like that rare? Are they common? Because, it's comments that I don't care how much someone disagrees with me. I don't think I'm getting like that level of scrutiny and responses like that. And I think that's something that I can't put myself in your shoes, but how common are comments like that?
Yeah, they can be pretty common, when not just when you write something like that, but like when you say anything that someone disagrees with. They're first, if they're the type of person that's going to leave these comments and be combative like that, the first thing they're going to do is find a way to discredit you. And I think that the male trolls find it easier to try and discredit women. They just jump to like anything about your appearance is fair game, or anything about how you present yourself is just a way that they think completely discredits what you're saying. If I'm writing a serious piece that I really believe in about the treatment of women in media, or how we can be disrespected because like the lack of respect was a big part of my article, then you get these people being like, well, of course you don't get respect. I can see cleavage in your photos. And that kind of thing is unfortunately like a response that I see a lot. People think that's just because of how you look or how some of your pictures might be, that's why you shouldn't be taken seriously, or why you should deserve bad treatment, or people thinking less of you, or thinking that they can disrespect you, take advantage of you, or think that your intentions aren't truly professional. But I just see all that stuff as total garbage. Like, it is hurtful to read some of the stuff, but at the same time, I do think that if you're the kind of person that is going to discredit me based anything on what I look like or anything else I post, then I don't really have time for you at all. And I do wish a lot of people, when they make negative comments, especially when it comes to appearance or women's presentation, would just maybe think more about how they would feel if this was said to like any of the women that they care about in their life. Because I think a lot of times people aren't able to see that or think of it from that perspective.
I was in addition to directly hostile stuff, that women in wrestling media get. I was thinking, I listened to this philosophy podcast. So I was a philosophy student, and they were talking about how in academics and humanities, the philosophy departments are overwhelmingly dominated by men, and maybe part of that is because of it's a debate, and men are more socialized to be good at debate, and maybe women are more socialized to be good at conflict resolution. And that stuck out to me as maybe having some similarities to wrestling media, where we got to have the takes and argue with each other about who's the best wrestler in the world right now and who's going to win the award and stuff like that. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I can maybe see that. I think maybe it's partly that, and partly how hard it can be sometimes to, argue your takes when it's mostly men arguing back at you and kind of being like shouted down a bit. And I think sometimes when you put certain takes out there, or even talk about your experiences, like I did, it's seen as like a woman thing, like this woman complaining, this woman shouting about this, and that can certainly be a reason to make you think, not to do it. But I think, even sometimes when I say certain things about wrestling, it's like, oh, what does this girl know? Or this girl likes this wrestler because of that. And it can almost make you like stop and think sometimes before like even saying anything. And I think like, a lot of this space is not maybe the journalism space, but like say the YouTuber hot take space is definitely dominated by like a lot of very loud, shouty men that I think, I would think twice about kind of wanting to be a part of that.
How have you found as WWE has certainly got a lot more serious about its female presentation over the last 7 or 8 years? Like, what have you noticed? Has that permeated? Has that changed with the fan base over these years? Like, how have you acknowledged that? Because I try to imagine a social media world in 1999 and how that was, how females were being presented at that time. And for a lot of these male fans, that is what they grew up on and is sort of the mindset they are locked in as they are consuming pro wrestling.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. Like a lot of the there's a lot of fans that are started watching in the same era that I did, which was, just before the Attitude Era, and the stuff we saw there, like how bad it was. And now things have got a lot better with how WWE presents women. There's so many more women on social media as wrestling fans. I think for me, the first kind of real big shift I saw was like when Bayley was on NXT and how many young like children that she brought along, and I thought that was such a big deal. So there's a lot more female voices there on social media, and I think the younger male fans are way respective of women's wrestling than they ever have been in the past, and the ones who definitely started watching during that Women's Revolution era, the Triple H NXT era, definitely take it a lot more seriously than maybe some of the older ones who are still living with the idea of the presentation that they grew up with, that happened in the Attitude Era. Like we have a lot to get over when it comes to the stuff that happened in the Attitude Era, still.
I also want to just read this this quick portion from your article, and you can read this at stephaniechase.substack.com. I definitely recommend people to check this out. But you wrote, "Speaking out is not wrestling's past. When it happened, I saw many men want to jump to be the ones who were seen as supportive and helpful, but as the years have gone on, many have stood down. I know there were so many who wanted to be my friend, help me professionally, and be seen as a champion of women's voices. But once they ticked that box, then they thought they could close the chapter on it." And I thought you summarize it really well about speaking out not being wrestling's past. It's almost as though it's like the COVID of pro wrestling, that all of a sudden one day we woke up and everything was cured. And what are we talking about here? As we are now 3 years removed from speaking out first surfacing, what would you say, especially you being based in the UK, where I think that was sort of ground zero of the movement, of where you see the industry right on the ground there, and what has been learned from it, and what still needs to be front of mind, and steps that still remain to be taken.
So the particular bit that you wrote out, that was something I've been thinking about a lot, because I can tell you that when speaking out happened, there was some months where it seemed like every guy was your friend, and wanted to help you. And I think at that time there were so many, offers coming in from places of guys just wanting to have to be seen as the person that was giving a female voice a platform. And there was so much tokenism. And then it did all seem to die down, and the conversation about speaking out died down. And there's, some people who are still in the wrestling space whose names were out there that we just, accepted, like they're here. And it's hard because the particular incident that I wrote about, was tied to speaking out. It all started to do with a wrestler named being brought back, and the transparency over the investigation. And I do feel like we're at the point now where the idea is more, how can we make everyone accept that someone is back in the business, rather than actually, consider if they really should be, or if everyone wants them to be. And I think that there are not enough women being given a voice in these conversations, because the industry itself is very male dominated. It's men at the heads of organizations making the decisions. And that was the reason why I felt particularly strongly at the time when I wrote the article. So I think that we need to still think about speaking out as something that we are actively trying to make the wrestling world like a better place, and not just think about it as like we cleaned up the whole industry, because I really don't think that we did. And from what I've seen, I don't think that is totally true. That this is a great place where there's full equality, and where women are totally safe, whether it be safe to just exist or speak. So I think there's so much that we could still be doing, and still just having that conversation, and making sure that women are always part of the conversation when we're talking about like wrestler safety, what goes on, and even other things about women's like booking and presentation, whatever. I just really would love to know that there are women's voices always being heard. But speaking out is definitely not part of the past, and it is, I think, still a big issue in the UK.
Yeah, and certainly when it comes to creative, I know there have been, I don't know about currently, but there have been some writers who are women on the W writing team. There's a lawsuit involving one of them that came up recently. When it comes to AEW, I think you asked on the most recent media call, Tony, about whether there were women involved in creative, and he named a couple of coaches who are women, but it's clearly him and maybe a few guys that he's listening to. So I don't know that it's improved that much as far as women having a real influence on creative.
No, that I really wanted to ask Tony about that, because you hear about the men that are helping, like Moxley and Brian and Jericho, and I know he mentioned Sarah Stock and Madison Rayne, who are coaches rather than being in creative. And I actually listened to the Wrestlenomics where you talked about this, Brandon, and I think it was Jesse who said that we know that Tony's like the main person that makes all the decisions. So, is there really like a conversation to be had about who else is in there? And I think there very much is. And I do think back to what Big Swole said a couple of years ago about representation, and how all that went down. And she was saying that there wasn't someone there that she could see backstage creatively helping that, represented her or she felt that she could relate to. And like at the time that kind of went bad because Tony fired back about the people in the company like himself and Mega showing the diversity, but it's not what she was talking about. She was talking about like what's happening with the lawsuit involving, I think her name is Brittany Abrahams, the WWE writer.
Right.
And she was saying how important it was for her to give a voice to someone like Bianca Belair. Her writing for Bianca and Bianca, they can relate to each other. And even with her being in the room, there was still a lot of stuff that was getting shot down or not communicated properly. So with Tony, he may have the final say on the booking and everything like that. And that's totally fine. But I think that there should be some female voices in that room that are able to write for the women and help the women develop their characters, because the women in AEW definitely don't get anywhere near the screen time that are equal to men. And maybe if he had some, women there helping craft good storylines for them, that would help the entire division. And I look at someone like Sky Blue, for example, who's just at the beginning of her career. And I think I hope there's someone backstage really helping Sky Blue that can relate to or know what it's like to be Sky Blue at one point in their life. Like, I hope it's not, a man in their 50s trying to coach her who may be like a brilliant wrestler or a brilliant promo, but doesn't necessarily get the perspective that someone like her is coming from. So that's why I wanted to ask Tony the question, because I think, if this was a normal TV show with a diverse cast, you would, of course, be asking who's in the writer's room other than the showrunner that represents everyone. And, if we don't have any women represented writing, you end up with something like The Idol right now. that's what it shows like when the women are shut out of the conversation. So I really do hope that there are women there backstage that are helping with these things.
One thing that ties a lot of this together, along with the kind of present situation in the UK, is something that came out of Speaking Out, and that was the all-party parliamentary group on wrestling.
Yeah.
And I was looking up like when they launched this in 2021, and they placed all of these recommendations, and a lot of it was in response to Speaking Out. We fast forward to today, and this is a group that is, they were quoted in the BBC about helping WWE get WrestleMania into London. How would you assess this group, Stephanie? And has that mandate somewhat switched where, from the outside looking in, it feels as though this was something that was designed for sort of safeguards towards pro wrestling, and now it's like working hand in hand with pro wrestling companies, and I think that's a difficult line to balance.
Yeah, the all parliamentary group, as far as I'm concerned, they're a bit of a controversial group, shall we say. Like, they were started when Speaking Out happened. I personally don't think, from what I know and what I've heard, that they were really taking everyone into account. I think that there were some companies and groups that jumped on them, and maybe some of the people that helped set it up were involved there. And when it comes to anything to do with Speaking Out, I feel like they went quickly quite quiet on that and turned into very much like in a partnership with WWE. And that's kind of what makes me quite uncomfortable about them. They've been in Parliament mentioning Clash of the Castle, and now they were giving these quotes to the BBC about WrestleMania coming to London. And when it comes to that, I'm like, should London really be bidding to host WrestleMania at any time? Not when we're a country that's having an economic crisis, not when the politician talking about it to the BBC is a Labour politician and is hooking up with WWE, who don't let workers unionize. That it seems like a real conflict of interest. Yeah, and they smile a lot when they're comped WWE tickets to events, I think, and they we have All In coming to the UK, and it hasn't cost the UK anything. There's going to be well over 70,000 people there. And that's something that they've in no way celebrated as much as they will anything to do with WWE. But I think also the quotes by them were picked up a lot. And I think there's maybe kind of like a slight misunderstanding of what their actual power is as far as making anything happen. They're just a parliamentary think group. These groups don't really have any, real say in anything. They can certainly stand in Parliament and say it'd be great for WrestleMania to come to London, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen. But I would like, if I saw them, I would like them to appear less just as the group that wants to promote WWE and actually more, help wrestling in general. It is pretty wild to be so backing this WrestleMania campaign and be so silent on AEW, like other than just throwing it in a couple of times,
It sounds a little bit like the relationship between WWE and the Concussion Legacy Foundation, the Chris Nowinski Foundation, that was, doing research on and is doing research on CTE, and I think Pollock has really embraced Nowinski's organization. I'm struggling to think of examples, but I'm pretty sure that's happened. And coincidentally or not, since that's happened, we haven't really heard about more wrestlers who worked in WWE having CTE.
Yeah, I think because the group were formed after speaking out, and it seemed like a response to speaking out, and then maybe being from the UK and knowing a lot more people, I think some of the associations that they make are not ones that I would have made it if I was making a group after speaking out to look out for wrestling. And even the WWE connection is a little bit sus when it comes to that too.
What are you looking at in terms of, like, let's throw out the subsidy option, and that might ultimately be enough that WWE would not pursue it any further. But I mean, like, what do you see as the ceiling of what a WrestleMania, a 2-night event, can do in London at a Wembley Stadium or a venue of similar size?
It's hard to know what the ceiling is now with what AEW has done, because WWE certainly has a lot more presence in the UK than AEW, and AEW has managed to sell, around 70,000 tickets now. So I think WWE could certainly equal or beat whatever record that AEW sets. They did really well with Clash at the Castle. I think that was around like 65,000 tickets, maybe. So I don't think that there's any ceiling for it, because there's such a huge appetite in the UK for wrestling, and there's so many, and that extends to the whole of Europe and people that can travel. So I think if they, were to commit to wrestling or an event bigger than Clash at the Castle, they could certainly like sneak up to whatever AEW is going to do with Wembley. But I think unless they get Wembley as a venue, I think it's going to be really hard to beat whatever record it is that AEW eventually lands on after All In is over.
Yeah, that's what somebody told me when this story started, that it's going to be hard to find a location because of the football schedule, I should say. I'm talking to someone from UK, I better say football, not soccer. But and so I mean, does that sound right? That if they do it in April, it'll be hard to do it anywhere but Wembley. And Wembley, if they don't play football at Wembley that much.
Yeah, I'm not too sure about how much football goes. I'm not a football expert at all, but yeah, I do imagine that they'd find it hard to have a location. And then if they pick Wembley, you've got like that direct comparison to AEW. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the ads that AEW are running about Wembley, where they're like, "Yes, we mean it. It's Wembley," and that is kind of maybe the feeling of just how crazy it is that they're actually, running this stadium is like beyond belief. So I would be surprised though if WWE like jumped into Wembley like right after AEW did it, because if they do fail to sell as many tickets, then that wouldn't be the kind of headlines that they would want at all.
As well, when you look at that week, I would say like there's such a golden opportunity here for AEW. Like you have the huge stadium show, and I'm curious to see how much like mainstream coverage they can get that week leading into it. Like if I'm AEW,
Yeah.
I'm offering everybody. But what do you think is like the appetite for AEW to kind of outlets that are not typically covering pro wrestling? Like, do you think like this will be enough of an event that crosses over and can get them a lot of attention that is usually reserved for WWE and nothing else when it comes to wrestling?
I think they can get a huge amount of attention for it. I think maybe the problem will be that, and I think this is kind of the same in America too. When people don't know about wrestling, they see wrestling as just WWE. So you're bringing on these AEW wrestlers and you have to explain that they're not wrestling in WWE. But there's so much that they could do to publicize this in the UK. I do have a worry if they're capable of doing it, because I'm not sure like how well their structures are in place when it comes to media and media relations. Like I've not seen that much promotion for it in the UK yet, and I'm sure that will ramp up as we get closer to it. But as far as like getting people on TV shows and stuff like that, I wonder how good they're going to be at doing that, because I certainly feel like with my experience working in the UK that they do kind of neglect the UK quite a bit, but now suddenly they're coming over for this big All In show, so they're going to have to really like ramp that up. But I don't know, I'd worry about how much the structure that they have in place when it comes to like media relations and PR and everything to actually like make the most of this massive opportunity that they have with the Wembley show in the UK, to make the UK like AEW's second home, which they could really do with like just on the back of this show.
And Tony makes this point all the time, right? That in the UK, the most watched wrestling show is Dynamite because it's on ITV, which is a big network, as opposed to WWE on BT Sport. But even despite that difference in the power of the networks that they're on, it's still WWE that dominates in the UK. Yeah,
it's still WWE. Like you see, most reported on. You see, like when they were over for Money in the Bank, and Damian Priest was on like a Sunday morning cooking show like the next day and stuff like that. And WWE is the wrestling that people know. As far as like the viewership figures are obviously really good. It is weird how it's shown in the UK though. It's like on ITV2 and every week it's going to be at a different time and stuff like that. So I'm not sure like how many people are actually like that engaged with knowing that, AEW is on that channel. I think that they probably have way more viewers like on Fight than they actually do watching it on ITV.
My impression from being on Twitter is that all UK viewers are watching live on Fight.
Yeah, like that's my impression too about UK, that it comes from Fight, at 1 a.m. or replaying it. But it's WWE merch that you see in shops. The AEW figures, we did have them for a while and then they disappeared, and now apparently they're back, but I haven't seen that many. But it is, WWE is just what people in the UK that aren't following wrestling like know, and it's what anyone you talk to that's not watching wrestling right now, what they know of is WWE and the Attitude Era that was so huge over here too. But they, at least with being on ITV, like that's a really good foothold, and hopefully like that can help them get on other big ITV shows to promote the show and to promote themselves too.
Well, Stephanie, we definitely want to thank you for jumping on with us and chatting about all of these topics. Again, I would encourage people to go to stephaniechase.substack.com. And where else can people find out your work? And I'm sure tons of coverage in the lead up and including All In at the end of August.
Yeah, you can go follow me on Twitter at Stephanie M. Chase, and you can go to YouTube and it's Stephanie Chase Wrestling, and you'll find like lots of interviews and lots of talk about All In and stuff like that, and Dynamite reviews over there.
Yeah, great review recently of Fight Forever. That was my primer.
Yeah,
we had Mike Straw on the show. I was like, need to learn about this game, and I relied on Stephanie's review of the game, where I learned that you can customize your female performer to be Mrs. but not Ms. That is what I learned.
Yeah.
So
I will not comment on that or read into that. in AEW, but yes.
Well, thanks very much, Stephanie, for joining us. We'll definitely do this again sometime.
Okay, thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you, Stephanie.
All right, that was Stephanie Chase joining us. A great article that you wrote that you can go check out. And we might have a first on Pollock and Thurston. The Dynamite number might come down as we are live, which will be something else. Like one night, we just have to put the camera on Brandon and go through the process of when a number comes down and how you distribute it.
I've done some trial runs on that, but then like my scripts just collapsed and it was a whole ordeal. But someday, yes.
Well, we don't want to put you through too much, but
the thing is, with no show buzz, there are fewer scripts involved than there were in the past.
Well, I am learning all about your scripting and such, and I mean, man, the things you learn being around Brandon Thurston, the man is on top of all of this. But we have a couple of topics to go through, and I think we should start with this potential, and we should emphasize potential change in pay-per-view strategy for AEW with a report that came from Fightful Select that reads, Warner Brothers Discovery sources confirmed to Fightful Select that one of the major proposals from their end to AEW as it relates to an extension is the subject of pay-per-view events. Specifically, a WBD source told Fightful that they mentioned the very likely possibility of significantly expanding the AEW pay-per-view schedule even to one a month. We're told that this is something that Warner Brothers Discovery has wanted. We aren't sure on if those would be standalone or included in a Max streaming deal, as WBD sources would not elaborate on that. And again, that's from Fightful Select. But I mean, this is something that always comes up, Brandon, is what is the appetite for more pay-per-view content? And especially if you're talking about a streaming deal, like what that would mean if you could just get a guaranteed amount per month that would work very much in the same way the UFC system is with ESPN Plus. But I mean, AEW seems to be it's funny that we watch the television hours just increase. But with pay-per-views, Tony has kind of held that hard line, save for adding in Forbidden Door since 2019.
Yeah, I mean, the lesson of pay-per-view in the 90s when they added it in your house was that, you would get about the same number of people buying it regardless of what you priced it at. And I think the W Network sort of reinforced that, the notion that there was about 1 million, there were about 1 million people that would buy a pay-per-view at Max in terms of like WrestleMania. And you don't multiply that by 6 times by cutting the price into 1/6. So anyway, there's a pretty captive audience that regardless of what you price it at, or maybe even the frequency that they're willing to buy. And as you said, AEW is stuck to 4. I think we're at the point now, if you add Forbidden Door and maybe All In, now you have sort of 6, what we might call peak event brands. So that's covering half the year. Maybe they'll do All In again. And we've talked last Sunday about how maybe All In is this stadium brand, and it goes back to the history of the first All In and all that. Maybe that ends up being AEW's biggest event annually, because none of these other 4 certainly have stood out as being any more high profile than the other. The Forbidden Doors drawn a lot of interest for interpromotional reasons.
What do you think Forbidden Door would have done in Toronto if, say, it was at the Rogers Center? Like, do you think it would have been like the demand would have been, say, could they have topped 30,000 for that show?
30 is the number that comes to mind first, because I think just the notion of doing it at a stadium, it depends on whether All In is on the horizon at Wembley Stadium. I think at that point too, because I think knowing that show is out there and that show is going to be bigger than what a Rogers Center show would be diminishes how big that moment would be. But I think just being there for history has been a big drawing component for whether it was the first All In or the New Japan and Ring of Honor Madison Square Garden show. Being present for history has been, with no matches announced, these shows have sold out.
It's wanting to be there for something that will be of significance. I agree. That's to me been a huge hook, and specific to AEW.
But so I can see pay-per-view being one component for Max if they're looking at Peacock, and it seems to be working out for Peacock. We can say whether or not Peacock is working out, but WWE is definitely one of the positive stories around Peacock, and maybe they want, they take lesson from that in terms of adding AEW to Max. And I think pay-per-view would be only one component, including next day rights, which have not been monetized at all by AEW. I think that's something that we rarely talk about when we talk about AEW's next TV deal, but that next day rights, which the counterpart part in WWE's world is Hulu, which is, they're probably making a few $1 million at least from having those rights on Hulu. So I think there's something there in addition to pay-per-view that perhaps will be on Max. And the big question continues to be, where will All In be broadcast? I'm leaning back towards Max.
Yeah, I mean, we're inching closer and closer. Like, you would think like this, we've got to be imminent at some point.
If it's not Max, where is it?
Like, you're looking at traditional pay-per-view, aren't you?
Right.
Like, there's no way this is airing on TNT or TBS. I just think that would just be, I think that would be
for free on YouTube or something, I guess, is another option.
I mean, it's just at that point, like, what are we talking about here? I mean, another interesting point to this is the idea of like, what is your ceiling? Are you looking at coming back to pay-per-view every 4 weeks? Because that will certainly change the booking style of AEW. And you've also got you still have this albatross, maybe that's too strong a word, but Ring of Honor of like where this really fits into the picture. Because at this point, as long as there is not a buyer out there for Ring of Honor, it sort of just becomes this thing that is this excess content that we produce. And if you're looking at going to 12 pay-per-views and still continuing this ROH model, it just sort of gets to a point where, like, at what point are we looking? Like, there will be some diminishing returns in all of this. And Ring of Honor, to me, just seems like a brand that it's existing until something more meaningful comes along that they can capitalize on.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's fine for adding, I'm sure it's the most lucrative event for Ring of Honor, both in terms of ticket sales and in terms of the pay-per-view that it adds to it. But you didn't need Ring of Honor to develop a secondary brand that's, that serves as developmental. But you don't get the video library that comes with it. And I guess, I don't know, would that video library be something that could potentially be on Max? But I think part of that Fightful report is that, WBD was not necessarily interested in Ring of Honor, and that even goes back to before Tony bought it. So yeah, I mean, I hope Tony didn't pay too much for it, but it's it's something extra among all the other wrestling content you got to watch.
Well, in terms of ratings notes, we can go through some of the highlights over the past couple of nights. I would say like the most significant number came out of SmackDown, where you can always get the quarter hour reports over at patreon.com/Wrestlenomics. And sometimes these quarter hour performances will get referenced by Don Callis in a promo on Dynamite. But last Friday, we saw one of the most successful segments in years for WWE. The show kicked off with the trial of Roman Reigns, and this went approximately 35 minutes. And that second quarter topped 3 million viewers and more than 1.2 million in the 18 to 49 demographic. I mean, just a gigantic spike for this Bloodline segment that just continues the true movers when it comes to any professional wrestling story. Like, it is this one by a landslide, and this is, I would say, the most successful one that they have produced so far.
Yeah, to put it in perspective, I have no data point that's as high as 3 million, since this is only going back to like early 2022. So if you're curious, I guess that the Christmas 2021 would probably touch it, because most of that show, I think, in fact, was over 3 million. But it was huge. And in terms of the quarter to quarter growth, it was something like 29%, I think, in the demo from the prior quarter, because it's the second quarter that
they jumped from 956 to 1,229,000. So it was, this was just, it was a long segment, but it was just
and no ads, benefit of no ads in that second quarter. But that is such an astonishing quarter to quarter growth rate that it's like few quarters I've ever seen. And again, the most viewership that I've seen since reporting all this stuff since early 2022. And the demo alone, over 1 million viewers. So, like, just to put it in perspective, not to make an AEW comparison, but to make an AEW comparison, Dynamite does well under 1 million viewers most weeks. And I can't think of the last time they did 1 million viewers. It's been many weeks. More than 1 million viewers just in the demo for SmackDown during that segment.
When you look at something like this, and this is going to be, you cannot replicate this too easily unless it was another like significant Bloodline segment. But you can certainly see, based on the last couple of weeks with Dynamite, they are focusing a lot more on out of the ring segments, not just simply bell to bell, quick interview. Do you look at AEW as this is a signal of something that we can capitalize on, or that people want the alternative and we should not be trying to replicate what is working so well with WWE? Because it does seem like, at least Dynamite, they are experimenting more with, instead of like, it just seemed to be a fear of going without bell to bell ring action for any significant period of time. And now that's lessened.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not what AEW was sold at from day one, right? Being this more sports-like presentation of wrestling. I have to admit, that's not what I want from wrestling in terms of being not sports-like. I want an alternative that I wasn't getting from WWE in terms of respecting the notion that this is a pseudo sport, but we're going to treat it like a sport, and we're not embarrassed to do it. But we've seen, we have a world title program here with MJF and Adam Cole that's involving video game play and hanging out at the bar. So that's what we saw last night. We'll see, but it's done okay. It's not like those quarters have crashed in terms of the quarter hour ratings. I don't see them as being big jumpers either, but it hasn't been a negative, and it's been a minor positive, I would say.
The fourth week of Collision, which had Samoa Joe and CM Punk, they did 580,000 viewers, 0.21 in the demo. So this was a major rebound from Hamilton, which is poor Hamilton. I feel they're going to be a punchline for a while. When do you expect the return dates to Hamilton? What year?
About a year from now?
I don't
well,
know.
I don't know about Hamilton, but they'll go back to Southern Ontario about a year from now, I think. Maybe not Hamilton, though.
So you look at 0.21 for Joe versus Punk. Would this be, after 4 weeks, is this considered sort of the range you would hope for Collision to hit, or is this under what you feel is the satisfactory level? Because yes, this is above what is traditionally in this slot, but at the same time, this is, a lot of resources are going into this show. Do you look at a 0.21 as a good number, a great number, or is it still below what you would expect your number 2 show to be, or 1B really to Dynamite?
Yeah, no, I think that's very good. 2-1 and nearly 600,000 viewers total is just about what the second episode did. It'll be interesting to see what happens when there's not a CM Punk match again, because we do have last week, and apparently that was, my read is that, okay, it's the holiday affected that episode greatly. Maybe no Punk match. I know he was on commentary, but maybe no Punk match affected it. But Raw, which was closer to the holiday, that Raw was on Monday, the holiday was on Tuesday. NXT got crushed on the holiday. Raw did an okay number on that Monday, despite being 1 day removed from the holiday.
Did very well when you look at other, ones that coincide with the holiday. Like they held up really well. SmackDown, of course, did that tremendous number on the Friday. You're a little bit more removed from that. I just think like that Collision in Hamilton, I think the lack of a Punk match hurt. It also it did not feel like a must-see show going in that weekend. I don't think anyone was stunned when that number was so low. And we will see this weekend. You do have Punk in a prominent match. You have the finals of this tournament. And again, it's like there are going to be weeks that CM Punk cannot wrestle. You cannot rely on this. Like this show that is very much concentrated on one individual. And for the long term, it needs to have those legs that a CM Punkless Collision is something that can sustain itself without its prime performer.
And then Fightful did have a report about what WBD would be happy with in terms of the performance of Collision. And I believe they reported number 5 or better. If it's in the top 5, that's pretty good. And just coincidentally enough, both this most recent episode on July 8th and the second episode back on June 24th, both ranked number 5 on cable. So I mean that logically that makes sense. The ranking among all of cable or all of TV is, it's putting it in the context of what television is doing generally, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I can tell you though, I don't think AEW was getting ranking information, at least immediately, until this past couple weeks, where there's been no show buzz, and we've got Tony Khan tweeting a chart that looks kind of like show buzz.
Will he be putting out these charts at 4 p.m. on
I hope so.
Thursdays and Tuesdays?
I hope so. The more data, the better.
Yeah, and this was up against this past weekend's Collision did go up against the UFC prelims, which were on both ABC and ESPN. So those were simulcast, and between both networks, like that was over 1.8 million viewers plus ESPN Plus. So man, they are just spreading ESP or UFC across every platform they can.
So there was more viewership of the same telecast on streaming on ESPN Plus, in addition to what it was doing on traditional TV.
Yeah,
which we saw the numbers for. Yeah.
Yes. But no viewership numbers yet for ESPN Plus. We await those, the streaming transparency.
More big wins for TKO.
That is it. So there you go. That was some of the numbers from the last week, and NXT doing 671,000.20. Actually, very similar numbers to Collision this week, outside of like your 50 plus that NXT still has a higher concentration of. But when you look at, I mean, they were fairly close and quite a lot. 35-49 is where NXT does edge out Collision, but you do have NXT. Certainly these main roster cameos have made a difference. That seems to be a regular now moving forward.
And no overrun. Can you believe that?
That's
the first time there was no overrun in like 2.5 years. So the main event, which involved Finn Balor and Damian Priest, did very well, and Carmelo Hayes. Yeah, and NXT has gotten, I'm going to look at the median age chart right now, but median age for NXT was about 53 this past Wednesday, and it's really taken a nosedive, which is a good thing. It is almost the same median age as SmackDown now, which is, in the lower mid 50s, about 54. Whereas I remember I used to post the median age viewer chart, and NXT would be up literally at age 60, and people would make jokes about how it must be all people in retirement homes who are watching NXT, but it's gotten a lot younger in the last year or so. It's really trended downward.
So there are all of your latest ratings notes, and we will await the Dynamite figures to come down at a time to be determined based on the TV ratings gods that exist out there.
Well, Nielsen will report it at 4, so you never know. It's around 4 is usually when they come out, but sometimes it takes a lot of time to get to me. You never know.
There was also the note that SmackDown is now being categorized as a entertainment program as opposed to sports. This is the one wrestling show that when they moved to Fox, it was listed as sports programming. It now moves over to entertainment, with it being noted it was the #1 entertainment show last week with the 0.76 that they drew on Friday.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. We did see Michael Mulvihill, who's a great Twitter follow, who is I believe, senior vice president of data analytics for Fox. He's always tweeting ratings. I've retweeted him recently. And he pointed that out too. He's the one, I guess, who this story is coming from, as far as somebody commenting on it publicly. Previously, SmackDown was categorized as sports. Maybe that helped during COVID. Obviously, that was a determination that was made in fall of 2019 when SmackDown moved to Fox. But maybe that helped Fox satisfy some carriage fees requirements during COVID when there wasn't a lot of live sports. So Fox makes deals with various cable and TV providers, promising that we're going to provide you with X hours of whatever it is, live sports, and there's probably other things, maybe entertainment is part of that. We're going to provide you with a certain amount of stuff so that if something happens, like a worldwide pandemic, that prevents us from being able to deliver that, we have to go back and renegotiate our deal maybe. So maybe SmackDown helps them satisfy some of those requirements. I don't know why they've done this. My first speculation would be that, well, entertainment's cheaper than sports, so let's recategorize them as entertainment because we're renegotiating with them right now. But it did allow Michael Mulvihill to say, hey, this was the #1, I believe, right, is what he said. This was the #1 entertainment show across all of TV. So maybe there's some selling points like that to it too.
Yeah, you did have soccer going on last week that was doing very, very well. So I mean, it does differentiate it, but I mean, long term, I don't know how much this affects things, other than, I mean, it will. You would think like the biggest threat to SmackDown or Raw numbers, for that matter, are sports. So you can differentiate yourself in that sense. So
I can give you the Dynamite number, which is now available.
All right. So for context, last week they did 855,000 viewers and a 0.29 in the demo. So Brandon will be furiously calculating the updated Dynamite number for Wednesday night.
Right. Last week, say that again. It was 809,000, right? No, I'm looking at 2 weeks
855.
ago. 8:55. 8:25. This is so dramatic, isn't it? 825,000 viewers for AEW last night on TBS. 385,000 viewers in the demo. That comes out to a 0.29 in the demo. So the same demo.
Very, very slightly up in the demo and down 30,000 viewers from last week's average. So,
yes.
I mean,
exclusive news here.
Breaking news here, courtesy of Brandon Thurston at Wrestlenomics. There you
have a report later.
The Dynamite drop. Maybe we can get this segment sponsored every. We'll go live on Thursdays if we get a sponsor for this segment. The Dynamite drop.
What more furious interest is there? I guess around a rating other than a Dynamite rating. Maybe a Collision rating now on Tuesday. Well, this is perfect. We'll do a Thursday afternoon and a Tuesday. So this is a future plan, perhaps.
We'll just build it all around these ratings drops. What do you find is the? I would say the peak was when you had Dynamite and NXT the first couple of months going head to head.
I missed out. See, I wasn't covering ratings then. This is when I was, wrestling more or at all, and I didn't relaunch the Patreon and really get into this.
Wow,
as heavily as I am now until early pandemic.
That was when I was furiously getting the Canadian numbers out there for people and realized, hey, you know what, you can go to the site for these if you would so like. That was a time. But do you sense that there's still a big interest around Collision in these early weeks, or do you think this is kind of just settled in? How crazy is your timeline is what I'm asking.
I don't read it. I mean, there's at least a lot of interest and takes being had about Collision, I guess including by me. But I do wonder as for like a Wrestlenomics business. Wow, if I had started a little bit earlier or like a year earlier, it could have been that much more ahead. But I doubt that the level of interest in ratings is anything like it was during the Wednesday Night War. I imagine at least early on that was a really big deal.
I think that was certainly the peak of it, and you had just a combination of everything, like your two dueling fan bases. I think there was a romanticism going back to people that did not live through the Monday night era. That would have been a hell of a time for social media. Before we end, what has your experience been like 1 week on Threads? Much of anything?
It's fine. I am on Threads. BH_Thurston is how you can find me on Threads. It's fine. I really need a chronological timeline, though. There's no chronological timeline. There's only the
timeline's a bit annoying. I've heard the more sort of accounts you follow, the algorithm does catch up to better cater to you, but the timeline is a bit of a mess. Like I go on there and I've just got a feed of people that I don't want to hear from. So yeah. I haven't had a remarkable experience on Threads. It's very chaos free at the moment. I will say that. So I like that.
I've experienced no hostility yet. Yeah. I've only made one ratings tweet though. So in fairness, not sure that's a good sample, but yeah, on Twitter, my experience is, Elon is dying for me to look at that For You tab, and I just don't want to. So it's a constant fight with my thumb all the time, many instances per day. But I want a chronological timeline, and then I have some lists that I follow, and none of that is possible with Threads yet. But I imagine they'll have more features as time goes along if this continues to be as popular as it is.
I mean, it's very smart in the sense this rollout could not have gone better, and now you can just slowly introduce, like they can announce direct messaging, and it's going to be this mind-blowing thing of, oh my god, I can direct message now on Threads. So,
and I'm sure the DMs will be all meta DMs, like I don't even know, but Facebook Messenger I think is connected to Instagram DMs. Shows you how little I use these platforms.
Yes,
and maybe is that connected to WhatsApp? I don't use WhatsApp either, so I don't know.
You're not on WhatsApp.
Well, I have it, but I've never had a need for it, really.
Okay. Well, it's just another time drain. That's what all of these things are.
It's just a messaging app, right? It's just a way to message people. It's more global. If you have to talk to people, outside the country, right?
Yeah, it's good for that. I understand a lot of luchadors rely on WhatsApp. That's what I'm told.
Yeah,
so sure. If you want to tap into that community, that's where to go. But where you can go every single Sunday and throughout the week is patreon.com/Wrestlenomics to follow Brandon and all of his great work. Is Sunday too far out for you? What are we going to be doing? Are we going to be doing a deep dive into creative, all your opinions on every wrestling storyline that's going on? We'll get a deep breakdown.
No, never.
None.
We have let's see here. We have some of what we've talked about already. I don't know. I've got some Wembley slides in here, but it'll come together as the days go on here.
It's
Maybe
like
some attendance about. So I've started a write up on just sort of expanding on a tweet that I made last night about comparing what the TV attendances were for WWE now compared to what George Barrios revealed them to be in the years of 2014 to 2018. Spoiler: WWE's doing better than they were in those years.
Yes, they have done a very successful job of creating a moat around them. I need to really go revisit the George Barrios isms.
The bingo squares, yes.
I was going to say it's a home game. It comes with you. So check out all of that as well. You can go to postwrestlingcafe.com and starting this weekend, it is our G1 coverage. There will be coverage of every single G1 show beginning Saturday. We've got Karen Peterson and Bruce Lord that will be going through night 1. And then Wai and I will be doing a free show on Sunday going over night number 2 of the G1. So you can jump on board and follow throughout the summer. You can also get in your picks. Postwrestling.com/G1.
I've got
free to
mine
enter. You have submitted. I have
Yes.
to do my picks. So you can join Brandon Thurston and many others. Free to enter. Make all of your picks throughout the G1, and we will see how everybody fares. I had a decent showing last year. I'm hoping I do better this year. It's always a tough tournament to book.
I was thinking for a Wrestlenomics subject. I imagine the G1 is going to be running a lot of the same cities or even the same buildings as it was last year to do a market-to-market comparison. Because I think capacity in both years, both this year and last year, is going to be pretty unlimited, right?
I think so, yes. Yeah,
so
I don't think there's any restrictions at this point. And I don't think there were too many last year, if any.
So it'll be an interesting project to look at that.
Do you sense like G1 interest, like with just more hours of AEW? What impact do you think that's going to have on a G1 from someone that maybe was kept up on it pretty regularly in years past? Do you think that the North American output is such now that it's going to be fewer and fewer that are watching non-WWE, non-AEW wrestling?
I don't know if I'm the best person to answer this. You probably tell I don't watch a ton of the content. I know you guys have been talking about this. There's so much, and there is. I don't know that I watched any of the G1 last year. I don't know. Since the pandemic, I've really, it's really interrupted how much I've watched New Japan. I have unsubscribed from New Japan World only early this year. I thought about and I'm thinking about resubscribing. I probably will. We'll see. If it's really great and people really talk about it, I think people will watch it, and maybe there's a little bit of a tailwind from the emergence of social media and the internet. I know a lot of that has already been saturated. There's not a huge uptick in that. But if it's good enough, I think people will watch it. But it doesn't help. I mean, it hasn't helped New Japan at all that AEW exists. It's probably the best thing for them at this point to partner with them. But New Japan was in a far better position before the pandemic and before Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks and other people worked elsewhere.
Yeah, it's just a long-term question I have, and it might be proven wrong that like these other companies, they can find their audiences, but I just see it being just a further struggle for your kind of secondary. And like just looking at this weekend alone, you have big Triple Mania event. TNA's got its biggest show of the year. You've got the G1. It's you've got a 3-hour AEW block on Saturday nights, and this is just a regular weekend in the middle of July. And I just think that any of these events on their own, they would command that more attention, the more likelihood of some buzz coming out, and that's sort of what they're relying on, is like that word of mouth that the big match is on this show that you have to go check out.
Like, how much is it unlike? I'm tempted to make this analogy and realizing it's not a perfect analogy, but how much is it unlike? If you're a big fan of the NFL or the NBA or whatever sport, you're not watching every game, obviously. No. You're watching a lot of it, but you're certainly not expected to watch every game to follow it or to understand, to be really, in touch with what's happening. Is how much is wrestling different in that way, right? Like, I know people will make the argument, I just can't keep up with what's happening in WWE or with another show of AEW. I'm just not going to be able to keep up with it. It's going to overwhelm me. Are we at that point where like you don't have to watch all, you can watch one of the shows per week and you still get what's happening?
Yeah, no, I think that there is I would say the difference in the NFL comparison is that like each market has its fan base, and I would look at like certainly
The
WWE
stories within the team, I suppose. Yeah.
right. Like AEW, WWE, they have very healthy fan bases that might just consume those. I would argue that like I don't know if there's just a contingent of Impact Wrestling. Like forget everything else. Our walls are up. We watch Impact on Thursday nights. Like to me, they are drawing from an audience that when they can fit it into their schedule, they're watching Impact. If they can fit it in, they will order an Impact pay-per-view. And I would go across the board of a lot of companies at that Impact level that they are drawing from.
I think New Japan is a bit beyond what Impact is. I think there are people who, who
Impact I would put on like that third level.
Yeah.
New Japan is second, and whatever you want to like, obviously we know what 1 and 2 are for most people, but yeah, it's just that level of, it's like a Triple Mania, for instance, is, it's that certainly does have its core audience that is watching, but these Triple Mania shows, they rely on people that are only watching a couple, maybe one show a year. And is that person necessarily jumping in to watch this when they're keeping up with more stuff than ever? So,
and to an extent, there is finite media space in terms of, let's say, post wrestling. It would be easier to cover Triple Mania if there wasn't the G1 and 5 hours of AEW and so forth.
Well, we have to go deep on the stuff. We got a deep bench, so you can check out all of that.
John Cena, he watches everything.
He does. That man watches everything. So there you go. That is going to wrap things up. A big thank you to Stephanie Chase for joining us, and for you as well, Brandon. We will have a show next week. So originally, the Dark Side of the Ring schedule had listed Bash at the Beach 2000 for next week, but now it is listed for 2 weeks from now.
This is breaking news to me.
Yes, it was breaking news to me yesterday. So when that show airs that week, we will be having David Bixenspan on Pollock and Thurston.
He's committed.
He is committed. So he will jump on with us, and we will go into WCW 2000, the Hogan, Vince Russo debacle that was Bash at the Beach 2000, the legal case that followed, and the demise of WCW in 2000, which David Bixenspan and Chris Zollner have done some excellent deep dives into. So it'll be a great time to catch up with David Bixenspan on the show.
Yes. So we'll figure out something next week, unless you need a week off, because this is a lot of content. I know.
Well, we will see who's out there. We've thrown out some offers. We will see if anyone bites and comes on to the show. We have put out some asks out there, but yes, we will connect to the heavy hitters.
Got some pretty big asks out there. We'll see what fish we're able to catch.
Yes, we tried. We're always out there trying. We're trying.
Yes.
We'll see if we can pull in the big sharks. But that is it for us. Thank you for tuning in, and have a great week.